So if you went right off the map to the south, that's where Mecca is. And then Stephen's going to scroll down for us, right there, where it says Makkah. There is a man who receives prophecy from the Archangel Gabriel in 622 during the Hijrah, which takes him to Yathrib, which on this map is spelled Yatrib. And the people there in Yathrib take him in, and eventually the city gets renamed. Medinat al-Nabi, which means the city of the prophet. Today we just call it Medina. So if you look at a map, you won't see Yathrib on there, a modern map. You'll see Medina. That's that city. With soldiers from Yathrib north. So see where it says Petra? Go to the east of that. There's a city called, or a town called Muta. And he marches towards Muta with this army, 3,000 Arabs, 3,000 Muslim Arabs. And their goal is to attack the Roman Empire, because they're in it. See where it says Bani Ghassan? The Ghassanids were Christian Arabs who fought for the Romans. Where it says Banu Lahm, those were Christian Arabs who fought for the Persians. So I'm going to have to be careful here when I say Arabs. So I'm going to try to remember to say Muslim Arabs so that you know I'm not talking about the Christian Arabs fighting for the Romans or the Persians. Right? But for the record, there are Jewish Arabs too in the whole mix, just to make it really complicated. And the Prophet Muhammad will eventually capture Mecca. And when he does, he'll own the western part of Arabia and the very eastern part of Arabia, but not the rest of it. And this is important because Arabia had never, ever, ever in its entire history up until that moment been ruled by a single political entity. Not, the Arabians had never ruled Arabia, the Persians had never ruled Arabia, the Ethiopians had never ruled Arabia, the Romans had never ruled Arabia. At one point, the Ethiopians had captured a piece of Arabia, the Yemen. And then, of course, the Persians have that chunk over there in the northeast, and the Romans had that chunk in the northwest. But no one had ever ruled all of Arabia as a single political entity. The closest anybody had come, in fact, was the Prophet Muhammad. When he died in 632, he had gotten such a big chunk, he probably had about 40% of Arabia. He was replaced by a guy named Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr didn't take the title king, he didn't take the title emperor, he took the title follower of the messenger of God and became the ruler of this Muslim-controlled chunk of Arabia. He made two armies. He sent one army from Yathrib due east, and he sent the other army south to Yemen. And his goal is to finally, once and for all, conquer Arabia and rule it. And actually, he was ruling from Mecca at that point. The guy he put in charge of his army that went east was Khalid ibn Walid. And Khalid will do a series of battles against a heretic who is claiming to be the real prophet in an event called the Ridda Wars. And Khalid will win battle after battle after battle. And by 633, Arabia is unified. So the campaign started in 632. It took less than a year. And in part because of Khalid's decisive victories in the center of Arabia. At that point, there's argument amongst historians exactly what happened next. Did Abu Bakr order Khalid to keep going, or did he tell Khalid to stop? It's entirely possible either is true. He doesn't stop. That's the important thing. Whether he was told to stop or told to keep going, he doesn't stop. And he goes towards the very southern tip of Iraq. So see where it says Sabur? He's headed in that direction. He ends up fighting a battle in what is today Kuwait. It's called the Battle of the Chains. The Persian general Hormuzd chains up his elite soldiers to show the Arabs that there is no retreat, that the Persians will fight to the death because they've made it so they can't retreat because they're chained together. But also, because Khalid relied heavily on cavalry, it would be impossible to do a cavalry charge through them because there are chains in between them, so there's no way to get through. What Khalid liked to, the way battles went back then, everybody did this, the Persians, the Romans, everybody did this, is they would send champions to go fight each other before the battle. But what the Arabs liked to do was first poetry. So they would get their best improv poet, because they would improv right there. They didn't have a poem written in advance. And they would get that poet to shout to the other army a poem. And the belief was that if you shouted a good enough poem, the other side should give you the field and walk away. And of course the Persians are like, screw you, we don't even speak Arabic, we don't know what you're saying. So after the Arab shouts this poetry at the Persians who are annoyed, Khalid walks out and says, I'm my champion. I'll fight the Persian champion. That's a problem for the Persian general then, because if he doesn't go fight, it's general versus general. If he doesn't make it general versus general, it makes him look like a coward. So the Persian general goes, okay, let me fight. And they go out and they fight, and Khalid ibn Walid kills him within like 30 seconds. It's a really quick fight. And so now the Persians are going to go into the battle without their general. And what Khalid did was he just kept using his cavalry to do these charges against the Persians that just kept them off balance until finally he broke up their order. And what they should have done was they should have repositioned, or they should have retreated a little bit and then repositioned, but they can't because they're chained together. And he swings his cavalry around the backside and starts harassing them, and he tears them to pieces. The estimate is that he brought 18,000 men against 20,000 Persians, the same Persians who tore those Romans to pieces almost 700 years prior. And he walked away with a couple hundred killed, and the Persians lost, and most were killed or captured. And then what he's going to do is he's going to work his way along the western bank of the Euphrates River. And his goal is the city that's labeled as Herat there. At the time, it was called Hira, or at least the Arabs called it Hira. And he's heading towards Hira. And he'll fight 3 more battles. The rivers Walaja, and I'm drawing Ulais, Walaja Ulais in the river. And one of the battles, I don't remember which one, I'm a little, slightly embarrassed, but not really. There's 50 battles, dude. I can't keep all this straight in my head. At one of the battles, one of the Persian generals is like, screw this, because Khalid kept going, I'll be your champion. And he walks out, now the Persian general is stuck doing the same thing. And the first thing that happens in the opening moments of the battle is the Persian general gets killed. And so this Persian general goes, okay, I bet that bastard's gonna do this again. So he buried 12 Persian soldiers in the battlefield right where he thought the challenge would take place with straws so they could breathe through it. He buried them in the night so that in the morning they would come out and do the challenge. And then what was supposed to happen is once the challenge started, the 12 Persian soldiers would jump up and they just murder Khalid right there. So Khalid walks out, the Persian general walks out, the 12 men jump up, and one of Khalid's cousins was in the army, the Muslim Arab army. And he's like, that's not fair. And he runs out and joins Khalid, and the 2 men murder the 13 Persians. And then they destroy the Persian army. And he would use different tactics every time. And one of the battles, what he did was he'd snuck 2 cavalry units behind a hill, and the Persians were in between his men on the other side of the hill and his army, and he just kept slowly backing his army up and making a circle, a half circle out of it. So the Persians would kind of go into the middle, and then he signaled his cavalry that came riding over the hill, and they attacked the Persians from behind, completely surrounded, destroys them. He captures Hira, and then on the way, so see where it says Peraz Sabur? That is Anbar, the city of Anbar in Iraq today. He's heading towards that place. That's where he wants to go. And he's going to fight 3 battles, one after the other in succession. And here's what he does. So there were 60,000 Persian soldiers in 3 separate armies, 20,000 each. And they're coming for him. And by this point, he's down to 15,000 men. Because even though he keeps winning, he's still taking losses. So it's going to be 4-to-1 odds if he lets those 3 Persian armies merge together. And he's thinking, I don't think I can beat 60,000 men with 15,000 men. So if I'm going to win, I'm going to have to attack them piecemeal. I'm going to have to hit each of the 3 Persian units before they get together. So he races his army as fast as he can towards the first one. But first, he cuts his army into 3 5,000-man units. And he tells them, we're going to arrive at 2 a.m., and he gives them a date like 2 weeks in advance. And he says, I need you at this location, at this time, on this day. Go. And they take 3 different paths, and they're going to come at this Persian unit, and he's guessing where he thinks that Persian unit will have arrived to by that point. I challenge you. This is my challenge. 3 of you, you and 2 of your best friends, get into 3 separate cars, and you can use GPS. Pick a spot somewhere on the other side of the U.S. because it needs to be a long road trip, right? 3 days. I'm not even going to make it 2 weeks. Just 3 days. So I don't care where you want to go, Washington or the other Washington. Either way, it'll work out to be about the same. But make the 3 of you take 3 separate paths and then time it so that you arrive at the exact same moment. Bet you can't do it. Now take away GPS and navigate at night, trying to guess where you think the enemy army is going to be. They're there. When the 3 armies converge at the exact same moment, they catch the Persians asleep in their camp. They tear them to pieces. He's like, all right, 1 down, 2 to go. He looks at his men and he goes, this is where the Persian army is the next one's going to be. And he tells them, I want you there this day, this time. Go. 3 different ways. And the 3 units charge as fast as they can. And they get there. And the Persian army is there, and he destroys that one too. And then he tells his men, all right, we got 1 more. 1 more, and go. And they arrive at the right time, on the right day, in the spot where the Persians were at night, and they wiped out the 3rd 20,000-man unit with almost no losses. They dispatched 60,000 men in a maneuver that I bet a contemporary military force would never be able to execute, let alone 3 times in a row. Insane. It shouldn't be doable. He gets to where it says Dura. That's the city of Firaz. Firaz was the border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. The Persians and the Romans hated each other's guts. They had been fighting each other 628 plus 52, right? It was 53 BC, the Battle of Karhae, but there's no year 0, so you have to subtract 1. That's why I'm doing 52. So what is 28 plus 52? 80. For 680 years, the Romans and the Persians had been fighting each other. Can you comprehend 680 years of warfare? Like, I don't even know what that means. What does that even mean? By the time Khalid ibn Walid gets to Firaz, the Persians and the Romans looked at each other and went, you are no longer the enemy. We have a new enemy. I don't know where these guys even came from. Because you have to remember, at this point in time, the Persians had been an empire for 1,200 years. And the Romans had officially been an empire, calling themselves an empire, for 600 years, but they had been imperial for the 300 before that. Because even before Rome was an empire, it owned Spain, it owned North Africa, it owned Syria, it owned Turkey, it owned Greece, right? And so you have 900 years of imperial history for the Romans and 1,200 years of imperial history for the Persians. There's 21 centuries between those two empires. And they're also technologically the most advanced civilizations on earth. And they had massive populations compared to the Arabs. They're down because of malaria, but the Arabs don't have any rivers. They don't have the agricultural capacity to support large populations. The Arabs are outnumbered, they're out-technologied, they're out-moneyed, they're out-experienced, they're out-equipped. And Khalid, in 1 year, has captured Iraq. Our military was there for 8 years. We didn't capture anything. We captured IEDs in the face. So the Persians go to the Romans, they're like, okay, we're going to fight this one as allies, right? And the Romans are like, yes, yeah, we're good. Because in the meantime, an Arab army is attacked from this side and is trying to get to Jerusalem. And so the Romans know that the Arabs, you're outnumbered, you're out-technology, you're out-moneyed, and you're facing two empires. Do you attack both at the same time? That makes no sense, but it's exactly what the Arabs did. They attacked the two oldest, most powerful empires at the same time, even though they were outnumbered by one, let alone both. And so the Romans are like, yeah, we'll work with you. So at Firaz, the combined Roman and Persian armies, which by the way was largely made up of Christian Arabs, not completely, but there was a huge contingent, probably about 50,000 Christian Arabs. The combined Persian and Roman army was 150,000 men against 15,000 Muslim Arabs. So Khalid arrives. Khalid is on the east bank of the Euphrates. The Persians and the Romans are on the west bank. There's a ford and a bridge, which is convenient if you're moving an army. It's nice. And so Khalid needs the Persians and the Romans to cross the river to fight. So he very politely backs his army up from the bridge and the ford and split it into 3 5,000-man units. He liked that. And he put one upriver, one downriver, and then pulled the other one away from the river. And he just waited. So the Persians and the Romans start to cross the bridge and they're also crossing the ford at the same time. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And then he does a prayer as he's waiting. And he says, God, if you give me this victory, I will go to Mecca and I will do the Hajj. I know I'm going to die. I know there's no way we're going to defeat 150,000 men today. But that's what I will do. I'll run and I'll do the Hajj. And I'm actually happy that I get to die as a warrior here today. When 50,000 Persians and Romans had crossed the Euphrates, he blew a horn. The men that were up and down river attacked them by going along the riverbank and tried to then merge at the bridge and the ford so that they would cut the guys who had crossed off from the guys on the other side. Then what Khalid did was he took the 5,000 men who against 50,000 and he has them charge into him. And he had his men as thin as possible. And then he backs his men up. And then he charges again. And then he backs his men up. And he charges again. And every time his horses go in to those men, it compressed them a little bit. It compressed them a little bit more. So after a while, the Persians and the Romans are so compressed they can't move their arms, they can't swing their weapons. He's just compacted them together. And they realize what he's done to them. And they panic. And they turn around to run back to the river to cross it. 50,000 men turning all at once to stampede. You could hear the bones breaking. And then the Muslim Arabs just went in and started killing them as they're running. By the time the battle was done, 200 Muslim Arabs were dead. 50,000 Persians and Romans were dead. What is this? Khaled's like, okay, I'm alive. That's a surprise. And so what he does is he orders his men back to Hira. So what he does is he says, okay, I need to arrive at Hira. I need to show up on top at the front of my army. But I've got to now go to Mecca to do this Hajj. So he takes his fastest horses and his best men, and they race across the desert as fast as they can. They get to Mecca. He puts on a hood so that nobody will see his face. He quickly does the Hajj. He jumps back on a horse, and he rides as fast as he can. He gets to the front of his army just as it's arriving at Hira, and he assumes the position as if he was there the whole time, and he marches his men into the city. And a few days later, a messenger arrives from Mecca, sent by Abu Bakr, the Caliph, and it said, "You were spotted in Mecca. Don't do that again." Abu Bakr then orders him to invade Syria. So he's going to basically miss Dura. He's going to go south of Dura, and he's heading towards Damascus. That's his goal, is to capture Damascus. Because the Muslim Arabs are thinking if they capture Damascus, they'll get Jerusalem in the aftermath, because the Romans there'll be an Arab army north of the Roman army, and they won't be able to maintain their supply lines, so they'll just simply retreat. And that's how they'll capture Jerusalem. Khalid takes his men across this really nasty chunk of desert in a logistical feat that would be hard to replicate with a contemporary army today. He just takes his men through a spot that has no water and no food, and he gets them across. They show up in Syria, they come up to Damascus, and he captures the city. At that point, Emperor Heraclius is tearing his hair out, trying to figure out what to do, because all of this is a shock and a surprise. Nobody ever thought the Arabs were a threat. Where is this even coming from? So Heraclius goes to Antioch, which is on that map as Antiochia, but it's Antioch. And they had renamed it Theopolis, which is City of God. And he shows up, and he's hunkered down in there, and he gets together his generals, and he decides to launch a counterattack. And what Heraclius' idea is, you send 4 Roman armies, and you catch the 4 Muslim Arab armies in 4 separate locations, and you take them out piecemeal. Heraclius does not want to ever have a situation where he's bringing all 4 of his armies together, because he doesn't have the economy to support having that many men in one location. There's just too few people. The infrastructure has fallen apart. Word reaches the Muslims that there are these 4 armies now coming towards them. The commander of the 4 armies is a guy named Abu Ubaidah. Abu Ubaidah was told that he was in command, and Khalid was relieved of command. He could still be a general, but he would not be the guy in charge. And the reason is because the new Caliph, Abu Bakr, only lived 2 years as Caliph. He's dead. He's replaced by a guy named Umar ibn al-Khattab. The new Caliph is Khalid's first cousin, and he doesn't trust Khalid. He thinks Khalid has political ambitions. And so he's worried that if people like him too much because he's too amazing, he'll eventually try to become the new Caliph, and he'll do a political coup. So he demotes Khalid. But so Abu Ubaidah orders the Arab armies to head over towards where it says Al-Jabiyah. The problem is the Hassanids keep attacking them from behind. And so the Muslims try to figure out what to do. They decide to hold a conference. And then what they do is they ask an interesting question. Abu Ubaidah does, the commander. And the question he asks is, would you guys rather have Khalid in charge or me? And everybody looks at him like, we feel guilty saying this, but yeah, Khalid. And he goes, me too. I would like to propose that we promote Khalid to being in command unofficially, because I'll be officially in command. But unofficially, he'll be in charge. And everybody votes yes. And so he takes command of the army, even though he can't, because he's been demoted. And he comes up with a plan. And the plan is to head back a little ways towards Damascus to get away from the Ghassanids, to a spot where the Muslim army, I don't know how I should do this. Should I aim myself like this? It's weird talking to you with my back. I'll do it this way. So on the south end of the Muslim army is this giant ravine. And then there's a plateau. It's called the Plain of Yarmouk. And the ravine is the ravine of Yarmouk. And then across from the ravine is another ravine. So you can't really use them as an army because you'd be falling off a cliff to go into them. They're really steep. So he's got his left flank, his southern flank, covered by this ravine. And they just wait, which now forces, because now all four of the Arab armies are in one location, it forces the Romans to bring their armies together, which they didn't want to do. The commander of the Roman army is an Armenian named Vahan. But a huge chunk of this Roman army, probably about a quarter of it, was actually made up of Arabs, Christian Arabs. So this is going to be an Arab versus Arab fight at some core level. Vahan brings his army up and he puts it in between the second ravine in the west and the Muslim army. On day one, he does a really light, gentle probing attack just to try to figure out what he's up against, how the Arabs are going to respond to his attack. He's just going up and touching to figure out what's going on. The Arabs feel the pressure because they're outnumbered again. Now, this isn't Firaz level outnumbered, but it's still bad. We don't know the exact numbers, but it's probably in the ballpark that there were 120,000 Romans and about 40,000 Muslim Arabs. So the Muslim Arabs are outnumbered by about 3-1. And so Vahan is just sort of checking things out because he knows these Muslim Arabs are good fighters. He doesn't want to do anything risky on day one. The sun goes down, they disengage, a few hundred people are wounded or killed. It's not heavy casualties. On day two, Vahan decides he's going to have the Roman left flank and the Roman right flank hit the Muslim army as hard as it can. Because he figures he's got the numerical advantage, hit them as hard as he can. So he orders that. The Muslim commander on the left is a guy named Yazid, and the Muslim commander on the right is a guy named Amr ibn al-As. And Abu Ubaidah is in the middle, the guy who's supposed to be in charge. And then Khalid's in the back controlling everything. And the weight of the Roman army is so overwhelming, both Muslim flanks are collapsing. And they're in full retreat. And in the north, on the Muslim right flank, the women, so it's worth pointing something out that's actually really interesting. Women have always been an integral part of warfare in all times. We pretend like we've just recently let women in the militaries. The Persians had an all-woman archer division. The stories about the Amazons, that wasn't made up. That mythology was based on a real event. A rogue archer division of women, we don't know why, decided to go on a tear and attacked a bunch of Greek city-states on the Aegean Sea and burnt their temples and set their shit on fire. Oh, I cussed. I said I wouldn't. And they deserved it, just for the record. And then the Greeks were so traumatized by this, they were like, we were attacked by Amazons. And they were. And it really did happen. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool. Usually, women were support staff. They weren't in direct combat roles. Notice I didn't say always, I said usually. For example, the Vikings fielded women. The Persians, the Vikings, the Armenians fielded women. The Romans did not ever field women. They were against it. But women still played a support role in Roman legions. And the Arabs were the same. They did have some women warriors, by the way, just so we're clear. But for the most part, there were very few women who participated directly in battle. In any case, the women on Amr ibn al-As's side pull down the tents, grab the posts, and charge the men who are retreating. And they shout at them, you've shamed your wives, and now you have a choice. You can be killed by your wives, or you can be killed by the Romans. Vahan's blown away. He can't believe that he attacked an army a third the size. They broke it, it rallied, and pushed them back. But he thinks, I've got it. I've killed enough of them. This was a bloody enough affair. I can probably break them the next day. So the next day, which is really day 3 at this point, he decides to focus everything he's got on the Muslim right flank. So he's going to ignore half the Muslim army. He takes everything and he smashes it in. And sure enough, the Muslims are being pushed back, and the women take the tent posts back and are holding it a line against their own men. And the Arab men turn around and re-engage, and they stabilize the situation. Khalid brings his cavalry units around, and he smashes into the Roman flanks that are attacking, and they slowly push the Romans back. And day 3 ends right where it began. Vahan is now really upset because he can't comprehend how he's not moving this Arab army. But he thinks, okay, I think we're still in this. So day 4, he decides to do the same thing. Push that same Muslim right flank. Just hit them as hard as you can with everything you've got. And Khalid this time had assumed this was going to happen. So what he had done is he had redeployed his cavalry so that it would be able to respond more quickly. And he manages to stabilize the flank, even though it does start to collapse. They do start to fall back, and they manage to push the Romans back, and they stop day 4 right where they started. Day 5, Vahan sends a guy to talk. And he's ready to come up with a compromise. Like, maybe you get Jerusalem and we keep Damascus, something like that. Khalid goes, oh, the Romans only talk when they're losing. Okay, I'm going to refuse to talk. Day 6, he took all his cavalry. It was about 8,000 men. Out of his 40,000 men, about 8,000 were cavalry. And he put all of them on his right flank. When the sun came up, he swung it around. So now the Romans are trapped between his army and the 2 ravines. There was a bridge over the western ravine. During the night, he had sent 500 cavalry around through the plain. They had snuck down into the ravine, and they had captured the bridge. And his goal is to get the Romans to run towards the bridge, because there's nowhere to go, because the Muslims actually have the bridge, just the Romans don't know. And he comes swinging over the top, and he smashes the Roman left flank really hard. He breaks the Roman cavalry unit that was there, and he breaks the Roman army that was there. It's the cavalry unit and the army start to retreat. They're running in 2 other Roman units, sending them into disarray. And then the Romans try to respond with heavy cavalry. Vahan sees what's happening. He organizes cavalry. He draws it in, but it's heavy cavalry and it's slow. Khalid comes in with his light cavalry and he attacks them before they can get into formation, destroys them. Then he takes his cavalry and he slams it into the back of the Roman army. It breaks and goes into full retreat. And that's how he took 40,000 men against 120,000 men at Yarmouk and destroyed them. Vahan got away with a cavalry detachment. Khalid grabbed his fastest horses and his best men, and they took off and they chased General Vahan. And they caught up with him just outside of Damascus. And Khalid lets his men tear up Vahan's men until the only man standing is Vahan. And Khalid had told his men, don't touch him. And then he comes up to Vahan and he says, you are a man, a man's man. And so I'm going to give you a man's death. And they dueled one-on-one, and he kills Vahan. And then Khalid goes and recaptures Damascus. Emperor Heraclius holds a council, and he asks his remaining generals, what should we do? And the generals tell him, we've lost Syria, it's done. There's nothing we can do about it. And so Heraclius gets on a ship and he says, farewell, Syria. You have been a lovely province, and now you will be a lovely province for the Arabs. And he withdraws. And that was the last time, second to last time, there was a Roman army in Syria. They'll get in one more time, but they don't really keep it for long. Khalid and his army now return to Jerusalem, which on this map is Hiroshima, in case you were wondering. And when they get there, the Romans have largely abandoned it. The Roman military has. But there's enough people manning the walls that you can't get in. So the Arab army is stuck outside trying to figure out how to get inside so they can capture this holy city. The Archbishop of Jerusalem, a man named Sophronius, by the way, a Christian Arab, a loyal Roman citizen, indicates he's willing to negotiate, but only with Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Caliph is Umar ibn al-Khattab's first cousin. And that's where I'm going to end the story.